very free to come. I do that? Me too. Welcome everybody, and briefly welcome and introduce our guests, because I'm very thrilled that they've come. I mean, we've done a lot of digging and excavating, and so I'm thrilled that we've the people who have come to share with us today are excavators. And so I just wanted to briefly welcome Chris. Thank you, Chris, for a whole semester of guidance and help in the hard parts. Help with the hard parts. We always need Chris Rosewood. And Saya Holman is here. She's from Helsinki. And we've had a number of conversations the last few years, and I know she's working on the hard parts of education and its relationship to the sciences and arts and large institutions and what roles they can play. I think it's very important work, and I'm just thrilled that she could join us for this. Dr. Anthony Thesis, oldest friends, Cooper Union alumni, and architect, and painter, and professor at RPI, and a dear close friend. Sometimes I would say there's things that Anthony knows about nobody else seems to know. Nobody knows him like he knows me. So I'm thrilled he came. And I didn't have to twist his arm that much, but it totally mattered to me that he was here. He showed up, so thank you. Frida, over from Sweden, an architect, studied in Aarhus, and is now a fellow at Bracelet. UK Wilkinson, who's also an architect, and also from Denmark, and is also a fellow at Bracelet Numbers and teaches with me at Cooper Union. Che Perth, Cooper Union alumni, architect, master sailor, and Arts, Letters, and Numbers fellow. I'm thrilled that this crew has been able to come on for this. Some of them are coming right now from the house on the hill. And Uri Bergman was also a student of mine years ago, taught with me for years at Cooper. I think me and Anthony and Uri were a team for a number of years at this. True, right? And then went and did an MFA as well in California. And now he's back in New York, and I was thrilled that he did come up. So, he's originally from Israel. And am I missing someone? So, I'm not going to say a lot in the beginning. Just want to say, most of you know, I think, the potential of these spaces of education. Very rare. I mean, if you do any kind of cross-section, by that I mean in every sense, programmatically, structurally, physically, politically, economically, you make a cross-section. This space we're in is an extremely rare space. The ordering systems, the structure, the underlying gravitational forces. Talking about if this room were in any number of other kinds of places, No, there's a reason I wanted to say this at the beginning. I think the potential of the time that people have with others in these unique environments that we can call them school or university or institutions, whatever we want. They're quite extraordinary in terms of what can be done with that. And for me, probing the actual structure of that space, of what is it to say we're in school, what is school, What's the program of school? What's the structure of school? And then you get to disciplines, you know, these kinds of things. What's the structure of a discipline? I think that over the years it's become increasingly clear to me that the crucial role that school plays in culture and in civilization as a space that is in some way intensely porous and autonomous from an enormous amount of homogenizing forces. You know, the sort of regulation and homogenization that comes from a lot of the other spaces you could imagine we could be standing in right now. So I wanted to say that because when we start the thesis question, for me, fundamentally, deep in the foundations of what's at stake is that each individual has to set out to not only, of course, ask their questions, find ways of finding their voice in their questions, which is to say listen, listening, but also, and it's maybe tacitly understood, reinvent an imagination of what a discipline is. Meaning there isn't any pre-existing, this is what X, Y, and this architecture is, or this is what art is, or this is what finance is. You go underneath and say, inherently part of what it means to be a creative person is to actually ask those questions too, which is to say, how do you author a discipline as part of the project that you're doing within a discipline? Right? How do you reimagine that? And I wanted to say that because, of course, to do that is scary. Right? And most of you know, I say 3 criteria: risk, precision, and honesty. That's it. That's all people who are taking risks, who are aspiring to precision, and who obviously take anyone away, the thing collapses. It's like the world just falls. And so what I'm saying is the people that I've been lucky enough to work with this semester have been in waters that were totally new and different in the sense that they had to figure out what are the footings of their questions. There was basically no footing provided. It's a little bit of a magic trick. I'm going to remove the footing, and then you either fall or build a footing. And usually people fall a little bit, and then they build a footing. So I just wanted to share that at the beginning. That's the scope and spectrum of what we've been up to, and I would argue not only is it part of what leads to blossoming, it's also, I think, a fundamental social poetic act, social political and poetic act, that much larger than institutions or schools or universities or anything that means. Meaning it's in the big context that we try to do that. It's very rare. You're not going to do this in any of those other places that I mentioned through the cross section. So anyway, I just wanted to share that at the beginning, and we get to start.
Hi, my name is Dupont-Madinier. I would first like to start by dedicating this presentation to a mentor. And thanking you for everything. Jonathan Rose.
Even with the stand on my shirt.
We wet the floor.
The veil is not a veil. Can life exist in the form of a poem where we can inhabit the nuances of what is unknown? For the tonal resonance between what exists and what is perceived can envelop us in a song that draws an inhabitation that we can conceive. Constructing its existence lies in derobing hidden forms through an evolution of spatial pressures that reveal what was worn. To slowly unravel the resonance of what's created between the cognitive mind and its hand, and allow the double entendre that exists at the root to construct an unseen geographical land? Can architecture inhabit the artifice of a story that needs to be told, which may deafen ears if the whisper is too bold? The inhabitant must absorb and unlock the secrets of the opaque air, within which you are willed to take care. How does the body of work envelop us in a sensual narrative that melts us into the empathic chambers of an anatomical declarative? Can the faces found in the echoes of this architectural voice form a loyal accomplice that unlock and could make your body rejoice? Here is the point where the unknown inhabitant is completely subsumed, where a temporarily exposed recognition that allows them to bloom. What does it mean to understand the veil through an anatomically modeled mind? To break apart an emphatically charged and loaded socio-political construction which triggers such a guttural response? The thesis seeks to transgress a threshold of understanding, a place where the confluences of different social certainties and cultural rituals and spatial practices forces one to transgress the thresholds of unknown spatial practices. Each is of a point of view which defines different value structures that we must puncture to inhabit. Like a charm bracelet, the work is an installation of relationships that are loosely composed with an imagined line. The project models a critical economy of perceptions that key into a labyrinth of relationships. Each is therefore a threshold one must cross as the procession which weaves different spatial bodies apart and together, while embodying different bodily pressures onto the inhabitant. It is the architecture that reveals the extension as well as the contraction between ourselves. Can architecture uncover phenomena of our modes of perception? How can it bring to light the subjects that we question? For in the speculative enigma, there is a persistent flaw that shadows the empathy. There lies an answer that we can draw. How does the architecture how does the architecture that we create capture the chambers of our minds, even the ones that we have vaulted safe within the most confined? Can we regain a sense of capacity through the embodied recognition of this space, or will its linguistic definition permanently seem displaced? Ascending and repelling. To arrive is to transgress a great ascent. For with every step, the body must bear a weighty sweat of an approaching trail they must circumvent. The foundations of the air are glacial. With every breath upon the counter, it is stifled. So it requires a rigorous structure to maintain a stable breathing cycle, which sets the tone to inhabit the body and allow for its survival. For the path traces the depth of a vague and convoluted journey through each trek, which climb the geographies of suspending disbelief of an ultimate horizon to take set. Upon the arrival of the bathing, billowing bivouac, you find yourself rappelling into a cul-de-sac. It is a jump into a void that dissolves the confines of everyday thought to replenish the volume within which the human body fits into slot. Its ritual, although at first may come to mind in the form of lust, when reenacted collectively, transgresses our everyday principles that clothe us, to expose the hidden truths of our geometrically constrained modes of perception, and allow us to dive into our bodies of relational conception. And in understanding your previous state of mind, the prism of your previous prejudice are derobed and no longer exist within the same confines. For the threshold demands your perceptual references to be rethought, to rediscover the human figure which is largely distraught, to rediscover the shadows of what we leave at arm's length and reveal the story of a hidden body that once strangled. In embodying the sacred site of the Chetty, the entrance requires you to leave behind the things you carry with you. It is the height and width of the nidhi that filters you out in a new kind of esprit. Your toes bathe in the shallow wells of a basin, which set the tone for the slippery journey you will be taking. For you have trespassed into a new ontological ground, where the discovery of new argonautics shall be propound. Like the whisper of Le Corbusier that indoctrinated Ronchon's confessional booth, the spatial plan enables you to hear the whispering secrets that slips from the beholder's tooth. It is therefore through the echoes of a human face that the eye could collect the sinner sound of what was defaced. The ritual lifted by the physical act, reenacting a primal energy that carries the virtues into a medium that is compact. The air is moist and the sounds are deep. The opaque steam mystifies the flock of sheep. The eucalyptus perfumes persuades the cloudy air as droplets of steam purl down the curves of a body bare. As a first infraction, the mist around the body holds, constructing layers around you which unfolds. Steaming at your melting bones, emitting heat, convoluting your anatomic zones. Under the sky of a dark moon, masses and heated water melts as a body is swooned. The turmoil of polar temperatures are slowly subsumed when an attack on the flesh is no longer consumed. There is a prominence in this newfound state where there is no need for external forces to mitigate. Looking up at the sky, space no longer exists in a contiguous constellation of stars, but through the dimensional relations of what lies afar. Just in Malher's La pipe n'est pas une pipe, the definition of sighting remains in a state of what can be confused with incomplete. For the depths of the character cannot be reached, even with the vivid images that we are invited to meet, yet we must continue to approach the threshold of what is not yet understood, and choose between two paths converging from a white wood. The steaming unknown will wrap around you like a fog, which will ask you to listen with the ears of a dog. And once you've read the view of a space drenched in heat, you can ponder a plunder that burns so hot you cannot repeat. No longer crippled, but complacent of the journey you have passed, you retrieve your clothes for a new summit which calls for you to pass.
Merci.
Thank you.
Wow. Absolutely. Everything matters. Everything. One twitch of the eyebrow, it doesn't matter.
I'd like to say one very short thing, which is that the reading, for me, evokes one of the most complete senses of complexity for human life that I've ever heard read. That is very different to common situations where we hear one thing described in comparison to another, and we're just left with a dichotomy. But in that reading, it went from condition to condition to condition with multiple stages in all directions. It wasn't a ladder, it wasn't a map, it was a complete fluid network of any possible position in that can be authored by somebody being mindful about the conditions that they're embedded in. So, thank you.
If I just bounce off you here, Chris, I think
there's so many things that I would run to, but so I'm going to just stay focused on what you just. I think as a work that began in this enigmas of veil, and very quickly became, of course, us as veil of consciousness. To be able to construct this space as a work coming out of that question is astounding. And for me, what is profoundly moving is it goes into the enigma of this, of language, as fundamental to our consciousness and to the spaces that therefore complete our consciousness, right? I mean, this conversation that we are in, language is inseparable from it, and not the authority over it or under it, but in an emergent conversation with it. I always go back to reproduction. I love this word, right? Reproduction, right? Biological reproduction or mechanical reproduction, photographic reproduction, artifice, language and bios, the same will. Darwin and Benjamin are sitting talking to each other, I guarantee you. It's the same question. The gigantic will to double ourselves into the world, to reproduce. Is fundamental to being human, in both biological and linguistic and image and all of it. And so to go after veil originally through consciousness, through visual consciousness, and to emerge into a language space, a Hiawatha, voice, rhythm, tempo space that is in that conversation, relationally to the room we're in. That's an architect. I mean, you know what I'm saying? To me, that's it. That's the task of the discipline. Perfectly constructed right now.
The sense of listening to that writing is an evocation of possible relationships of language with what is possible in a human life without in any way specifying or structuring for you. There's this fascinating notion that anything to do with aspiration involves with the notion of changing ourselves to be better than something we have or something we are. Whereas in fact, the quality of the thinking and the word structure and the writing in the reading is that it's to induce a sense that anything that you have or can be is already wrapped up in what we are. So it's the opposite way to the cultural construct that you've got to change yourself in order to be better. And I think that's a very important, very sort of profound thing to locate that with the complexity of that, to locate a sense of that back into something you already are and already have. It's a very, very nice.
Young children brings that into immediate, recognition. You just wish you could be as precise as them.
I mean, what a fascinating body of work and thesis. And, I had an opportunity to see the room for a few minutes before the presentation started. And in this project work, reaffirms a number of key conditions for me about the potency of architecture as a body of knowledge that is quite unique maybe from every other body of knowledge, which is that we can be suspended between multiple modes of representation, of making thought, and they're all equally impactful and significant, and the relationship is very important. So that is to say, the act of drawing, the act of speaking language or writing language, the act of constructing objects in space. And this room is an incredible, it's almost like it's a cross-section, imagine taking a cross-section through her mind in a way, and unfolding it into space. I mean, it's really remarkable. You know, in your text, you, I think, can essentially envision this room, as you say here, as an installation of relationships that are loosely composed. And I think that is really the incredible power of the project, that there are certain key moments that appear, disappear, reemerge in a transformed manner. And I would say the one for me that is the circle, most notably. And I think the precision of beginning with the veil, the mask, the face, right? When you think about the circle of the eye, you know, I always find it very strange that the eye is the only part of the human body that's actually an ideal geometric figure. I mean, it's very strange. We never think about it that way. But there isn't any other part of the human body, to my knowledge, although I do have a few friends that have disfigured eyes. And for most of us, I know a couple of cube-hearted people, but other than that, to me, there's an incredible potency in the way the circle moves and transforms itself through the project. If you look at this incredible drawing on the wall, David said, you know, that's the beginning of the project. And that these are somehow, I imagine, sectional moments through these incredible faces, right? Some of them known, some of them unknown, perhaps. And that they then make their way into these incredible shrouds on that base. It's phenomenal. And those drawings on the wall there are spatialized constructs taken from there. Right? So once that is set in motion, you realize that is that. And then you have these suspended figures here. And the natural, which is unbelievable. And I feel as if this drawing is almost, it's all, I read it as a notational construct of this entire room, including your performative weaving together of the work. I mean, I've not seen a drawing like that of an incredibly long time. It's almost like a cosmology of everything that's in the room. I look at these prints from behind, which are strangely mysterious. I mean, they almost read to me like drawings of one would close their eyes. You know, you get this very strange kind of flicker of light when you close your eyes, because obviously the eyelids are not completely opaque, they're translucent. Right? So you see some of what's in the world, but you also see what's in the mind. You get an after image of things. And these incredible images are just phenomenal. So it's such an incredibly dense and slow room. And you really have to be in every single one of these drawings or constructs to put together the piece. And what I love so much about it is that it affords the opportunity to enter at any given point. I mean, I know this as the origin, so to speak, because I was told, but I can very well imagine that this is the beginning, so to speak, and that we come back out on that end. Right? And I find that to be just brilliant. I'll ask you a question. In all of the pieces, right, there's something interesting about the use of white, right, as a sort of underlying condition, and then black as another. And there seems to be an amazing kind of interest in the incompleteness of things or the unmaking of things. I look at all of these incredible shaped constructs on the wall, and I'm curious to hear about your thoughts on the idea of making and unmaking, because that also seems to be a very powerful part of your project. Everything seems to be in a state of becoming. It's not about a fixed, calcified condition. It really seems to be something that's emerging, unfolding, or perhaps closing in upon itself. Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I think this is the first time where I've understood the process of, like, you make a drawing to understand, like, to balance, like, your intention in the drawings that you're making with, versus, like, illustrating, versus, like, understanding it and, like, reading it and responding to it. And so, like, initially, these were drawings that I had made of a figure I recognized, and then I cut them up and then recomposed them to have the conditions of the recognized figure. And so, because I have a hard time abstracting things, and so it was forcing me, it was like a barrier that I was putting in front of myself in order for me to, like, move, like, around it, or, like, think differently about that, instead of drawing an image that I recognized. And so it's interesting because what ended up happening was that I realized I had a tendency to work on, like, 3 or 4 things at the same time. And I would, like, do a little bit of something and, like, stop because I couldn't figure out how to finish it, or, like, didn't understand where to go with it, and then go somewhere else and then come back to it again.
So moving between.
Yeah, and I think and that's why probably that you see a relational aspect, because, like, I'm building the layers of the drawings, like, separately after I've, like, responded to another one.
Yeah, and I would say it's interesting because it's almost like you're knitting that, not painting it, and you're projecting these, not knitting. And those projections are in those drawings. So it's not just that you're doing it all at once. You are crossing over these realms in a way that is extremely productive.
And I think I also realized that, like, you've developed an interest in, like the double entendre of things. So, like, when you hear, right, like, in the poem there, I say root and root. So is it, like, are you talking about the root of a branch, or are you talking about, like, the root that you're taking? It's both. And that's the thing, is that, like, so I'm starting to realize that, like, I can't let go of one or the other and, like, just define it within one category, that it has to exist within both.
You know, just on that point, for me, extremely pragmatic, the capacity to navigate depth and complexity in the poetic imagination that's fundamentally linked to it. That's the core ingredient, because it's the only way that the in-between starts to become the navigational principle. Recombination, I mean, it goes back to scenario. People have known these things, you know, long before neural networks were something they were working on. Right? People have known these things for maybe 10, 15, 20,000 years. We can go back to the caves, maybe. That you can't, in fact, create an emergent, complex imagination if you think you're going to locate it in a series of singularities. It is the double entendre. It's always the relational in-between, or recombination of them, that allows the thought to have a space, whether it's language or drawing or marks or anything. Ultimately, guess how important architecture is. It's this space for a thought, you know, and across all disciplines. So the porosity of being, of course, the porosity of disciplines. How are you ever going to understand the combinations that Laura was talking about if you don't realize that being itself is that porous? You see? So it's an absolutely astounding expression of them. That's why I've told you this with many times. When I'm pushed on what I think the criteria is, I said the dramatic whispers anonymous. I always end up there. I say, look, ineffable beauty is the criteria. And people think I'm being like funny. I'm not. That's the most pragmatic thing I can say, because that is that ultimate in between. Right? Meaning the capacity to imagine the most difficult complexities that we face as a civilization today is within the space that is aspiring to unfold with you. In the most pragmatic sense I could possibly say that. Policy sense. We need that.
I want to add something to that. As part of some of the conversation to the semester about this phenomena that when we look as human beings into the phenomenal world, we look into a reflector that's made up or is limited by what it really is that's looking. So if we're, in order to experience or know anything, we have to project something into the world. And by projecting such a multitudinous and multi-layered phenomenon structure, for want of a better word, that you evoke, it means that the idea of that is avoiding any particularity. And it actually evokes the sort of an acknowledgement of the phenomenology of things, which is fluid. So, and what I love about the writing is that the fluidity of that comes across with great lightness and a sense of humour and levity. Like this word, the cacophony of an outer world is no longer a bother. To me, that frames the profoundness, but also a kind of lightness, because you are able to say that because of being unburdened. Some people, imagine a mentality that will talk about the cacophony of the world, and, oh, it's terrible. In other words, talking about it doesn't relieve you of the problem of it. But by framing it like that, it's flushing.
Well, for me, as someone who's not native to English, I have to admit that I'm not able to follow English reading as quickly as the natives are, so I kind of reading some of it. But I think that's interesting because for me, even when the language that you're talking about, I'm not familiar with the poetry and the interpretations of that as quickly as you may be, one of those slow things, the hard to articulate. I find this work really interesting because I think it's a perfect representation of a process where like you said, that can be entered at any point and that reveals all directions simultaneously. You were saying that you were working on 3, 4 things simultaneously, and like David said, the knowledge happens, the creation of knowledge happens in between. There is no singular point that you can touch or reveal specifically. It becomes a network where everything is balanced in such a way. And I'm particularly touched by these drawings and mention that if you start with embodied cognitions or have developed ways of getting in connection with your or our own very space close to ourselves. You talk of sauna and experiences that happen very close to your body and then reaching outwards. And then coming back, and what's in between, and not what is dividing us and what is in unity with other society and everything that is outside of us. And those are all spaces that are sort of dividing us but also connecting us. And this work sort of, I see the poetry within this world that allows us to place ourselves, yourself, somewhere in between there and understand all these capacities simultaneously. And I think the simultaneous aspect of this, it's not just a linear thread, it's multiple threads that go across and form this
I had a very similar reaction. I was very struck by the fact that everything was rhymed. I think rhyming was so important to you, and the fact that your language was rhymed, and the fact that you were walking, you set up a certain tempo, a certain tone, kind of set the whole thing in motion. I feel like that tempo is also is a part of the echoing that's happening here of the work. You can see every piece of work is being echoed by other pieces of work. So you can see this there, even if it's not in a figural way, there's something that is being echoed across the room. And you set it up. I
I feel like the space is so tuned here that if you weren't walking the same in the way you walk, and if you weren't speaking the same way that you were speaking, in the rhyming that you were singing, it would have been a very different space. And I think that goes to show how tuned the work is, how attentive it is. It's really an incredible moment.
Yeah, the rhyming for me, at some point I recognized it as a ground because I was hearing it happening and I was listening to the words, but after some point I didn't have to listen to the words anymore. The words themselves, like there was like that veil, that barrier dissolved and I entered the work. The content of the words you were saying were directly connected to what I was thinking. And then for me, I recognized an architectural insight. Like there are very few spaces where I entered and I know that I'm inside an architecture. I felt that, especially when I saw you come out to that bucket and didn't have your shoes on, and you stepped barefoot on the ground. My heart jumped. Like, what happened? What happened there? You know? And that was beautiful. Moving around space, the ground, the inside. And then I started to think, well, how are you going to do this again? You know? And for me, that's my question. Like, you created this space, you've blown open this inside, right? The interiority. For architecture, for me, if that can happen constantly all the time, then it's real. It's in the world, it's here. And so you have to do it again. Like it's something you have to do again. And how do you do it again? How do you do it again without you being there? It's my kind of like, I want to know. I want to know where I can go to find this again.
Well, I think it's another aspect because it's not polluted. I mean, if you represent this work in a way that it shows what happens to friends, it will be another presentation. And I think this work completely allows that. I mean, the simultaneous aspects of all the simultaneous nature of all these different aspects and layers of your work allow that. It's just another perspective to that you look at the sphere from another angle without diminishing it to any extent.
It's also about keeping into stay with the courage that it takes to actually inhabit your work. Like you've been in this work, you've been in your drawings, you've been in your weaves. It's not something you've been doing separate from you. At least that's the feel I get when I'm in the room, is that you are in it, and that's what you're talking about when you answer that you were actually trying to investigate through your drawings. You weren't just illustrating, you weren't just finishing something you already knew how it's going to end. And I think that's about staying. It takes a lot of courage to stay suspended like that. It's almost like these, right? And I think that's the only way to keep a work like this alive. And it's vibrating right now.
I totally agree. I think there's in the question there's a very important part of the lesson that's being expressed here, which has to do with the present tense. So, meaning Louis Armstrong. So, did it happen? Is it gonna happen, or is it happening? And so every night, creating that vibration, creating that ineffable beauty, in fact, it brings up something which is, that night never ended. You see, meaning that present tense enters the world, and in fact, we, I'm not just saying we remember it, but deep in the question of reproduction, right? So again, is a beautiful problem of temporality and reproduction. Right? How am I going to do this again? Well, biological reproduction has a proposition. There are all kinds of other propositions, meaning being, that it's all the same day. Misquote Janis Joplin, who said it's all the same fucking day. So, meaning this, once the present is elongated out Whether it's a 6-hour Louis Armstrong, or whether it's a 24-hour Jonas Mikas film, or whether it's this room, it never collapses back again, is a really important lesson. Because we absorb it, it becomes part of the framework, if we want to talk neurologically, that we register the future present tense against. Right? We anticipate tomorrow will happen. This is now part of tomorrow because it happened, which means it's happening. I always make the point about Hamlet, right? Hamlet, in fact, is. Because it's always being given voice at any given moment, right? That was the readiness is all. It's all present tense.
That's where, going back to this notion of projection, the idea of projecting experience into the world is not just an abstract notion, it's something that is projected when an occurrence like this has occurred. And we have absorbed it, and it has a structure and an aesthetic about it, which becomes something real. Then that starts and is able to structure what it is that we project in the world, which means then we can meet that, we can meet different things as a consequence of what we project. So what we project is to create an engagement with the phenomenal world. It's not a mechanical construct.
You know, just as a parenthesis, I don't know if it's going to help this issue of present, but I just wanted to share, you know, at some point, Kim and I were having a conversation about veils and humidity. You know, and I'm always fascinated by the way humidity, if you just, it's really humid and then it starts raining. I could watch that forever, you know. The way the humidity becomes rain and then it goes back to humidity. And so we talked about that, and that brought me to the 10th Street Baths. For all of you New Yorkers who go to the 10th Street Baths, 1859 until now. And then it was so beautiful because I don't know, it must have been a week later or 2 weeks later. We were talking, and Kim had been to the 10th Street Baths. That was really amazing. She actually went there, you know. Part of it, what I'm saying, is porosity, the veil transforming into this thickness, solid space, thick bath. But it also has to do with the present tense, in the sense that, you know, I was in the baths, even if I wasn't, is what I'm saying. I was in because I was talking with her about it. I was in because I knew she had just been. You know, so this is what I mean about Louis Armstrong. You know, that we can hear that. We can inhabit that in many, many ways. So, you know, I've said for years, chapel is different because of Armstrong. Armstrong changed the program of chapel. Right? You know, you can never say chapel's the same thing anymore after Armstrong. I've never been to Armstrong, but I have. I mean, I've spent literally days with the plans and sections and photographs of that light. And so it changed the chapel for me, and I haven't been there yet. And I feel the same here. This work has now changed the question. It's changed it. I hope many others get to be in this, but it doesn't matter in a way. It's changed the question.
Like the Buddhist monks who do that beautiful artwork on the floor with sand. And it's all meant to be their work for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then when it's done, it's all gone away. And that's the beauty of it. It was created, it was carefully made, it was there, it was admired, and then it was away. And that's the beauty, that's the poetry.
Like us.
Like us. Like every piece of art, every performance that takes a moment in time is. It's not a past tense. It remains in the memories, in our bodies and minds and souls. They're the same here. This work is.
Back to the circle, the repetition. I'm in the liberal studies and liberal arts, and I've been working with Kim on her poetry, and I've seen the poetry on the page evolve to the poetry off the page, and this wonderful dialogue that she's created, this very liquid, fluid, rhizomatic conversation. And I'm struck by how you treat the threshold. Because it once seems like something you want to cross and blow up and enlarge and embrace. You conclude your poem with acting with each other. We act with each other, we act together. So we have a poetic, social, political rhythm and dynamic at play. And that once you say that there's the implication that it is the threshold itself is a crossing. And that's what we get, say, in Benjamin's notion of the ineffable beauty and the threshold, the veil, in his wonderful essay on Goethe's Elective Affinities, where he says that it is the beauty, well, actually, I wrote down the line, he says, beauty is neither the veil nor the veiled object, but the object in its veil. And so he's really bringing us to the medium, to all of this beautiful handwork you've done. Everything seems to me that is done by your hand. You've done this. I saw this in progress. I saw you carrying your bag with your mitts, and all of this incredible liquid drawing, and this intimacy that is evoked in these works, and the poetry, and the silence, and the secrecy, and how that in itself is a threshold for language. And I'm saying this today because the verdict of Zaranov's sentence that he gets the death penalty, it just breaks my heart, because I feel we're not doing enough with the threshold. We're not resisting the death, the destructive patterns of killing and so on. And I see this work as vital and crucial. And even when Benjamin talks about relational characters of Kant, he goes back to Kant's aesthetics, and he says it's the relational capacity of Kant that I'm really struck by. And it's all of this, everything you're doing at the limit, at the threshold, where the threshold itself is the crossing, but also the threshold is a crossing too, you know, and that you are going to move on, and you're going to create new dynamics and new conversations and new horizons in your future work, because you won't lose that intimacy. You know there's something, that engagement, that conversation with silence, with secrecy, with what is veiled, what is hidden, and so on. And it's just beautiful. Just I'm in tears.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. That was beautiful. I'm very moved by what you said, and then also very difficult to do what you just did. To bring death penalty into this is a crucial, important, and difficult feat of thought. And what I mean is, you know, architecture, it can repel violence, and it can be violent, and often at the same time. And to me, when I was speaking earlier about the pragmatics of ineffable beauty and the pragmatics of the poetic imagination, it is literally in the fact that the fragile strength of this work, of embracing something as ineffable as veil and its, you know, in all of its descendants and in-laws and cousins, something that human is an act of repelling violence in itself. So the content, it's not that the content has anything to do with that, but it is in fact an act of repelling. And then I think that you're sensing that, you're apprehending that. It's a resistance.
To resist it, secrecy, to resist.
So we are fundamentally human and therefore fragile and therefore ineffable and therefore we disappear as we appear, right? We're barely here with incredible strength.
No, it's not.
The veil is out of that. And I think linking that, remembering that that it is a social, political act to do a social poetic act, I think is a very important thing that we brought here, and you brought here. So thank you.
And just one other thing came to my mind about this drawing. I'm going to put Chris on the spot for a second, but he's got such a good memory, I never would. In the end of Michael's book, what's the name of that role? Michael Benson's book, Cosmographics.
Yeah, there's a medieval painting of the depiction of the heavens, and the caption of the painting, the angel Gabriel is rolling up a medieval scroll, and the caption of the painting is the angel of the Lord is rolling up the scroll of heaven at the end of time. And Michael and I had this, we carried that conversation on for a minute. So, okay, so when the angel of the Lord has done that, the idea is he seems to go about his business, you know, keeping the other scrolls tidy, just generally looking after things until the moment comes when a new scroll is brought out and unrolled for a new time.
Exactly. I'm so glad you helped me with that, because at various moments during the conversation that we've had in this conversation, I've been looking at that and just really picturing him rolling it up, you know, putting it under her arm and going out into the next present tense, you know, like opening it up.
I've got to just add that there's a very pragmatic example of that exact process, not on a metaphysical scale, but on a human moment-to-moment scale. As Saya was mentioning, the sauna. The first time I was taken into a Finnish sauna, which was very hot, and there's so much heat that anything that's bothering you or anything that's on your mind or the things you're thinking about, it just goes. You actually can't think. So there's this sort of release from this problem that we give ourselves, constantly thinking and inventing and thinking which ideology and what am I going to do now and what will I do about that. All of that is kind of separated from ourselves for long enough that a sense of your actual self, and as Saya was saying, you start to become aware of just the surface of your body and just you, just be. Nothing, no description, no nothing. So it's as though the effect of this heat sort of gradient, there's a gradient in that space that is affecting the constructs that we're against, much about the imagination and the way we think, and the kind of discrepancies they have with the very act of being as a simple truth.
Thank you. I think we're going to move on. Thank you very much. Great. Let's go next door.